It's not about accepting the great web of which biosemiology recognises, of which we're all part, and so on. So, well, I think there are various ways of reading that poem, but an eco-critical way of approaching that poem is to take my formula and to say, what questions for the reader is Robert Frost raising in the way in which he writes that poem? Because it begins in a very clear way, but it ends in a much more ambiguous way. So what questions is the writer raising for the reader through nature imagery in that poem?
Okay, any other questions? Mariam, please. Mariam al-Naqr from Cairo University.
I'm very interested.
Shout, go on.
Yes, okay, I'm very interested in urban ecocriticism
Yes,
urban environmental
yes.
literature. And I really wonder if you can recommend books, bibliography to read about this new approach in ecocriticism.
Yeah, it's actually now quite an old approach, and it came very early in the development of American eco-criticism. And in fact, there is an anthology called Urban Nature, which I recommend to you. And that there's an anthology called Dark Nature, which also has a number of essays about urban ecology. I mean, this is a really important issue for us because most people do live in urban societies, and the question is, to what extent are they alienated from nature? And how much do we need nature? You know, we need trees growing, not just to purify the air, but to actually help us understand ourselves. There is evidence to show that people in hospital whose bed looks through a window to a tree recover earlier, need less medication than others whose hospital window shows onto a concrete wall. Now, why is that? Because images of growth and decay help us understand our own growth and decay, because we also are nature and we need to live with animals. That's why we have pets, having been separated as herders. Now we're in urban societies, not herders anymore. We need pets to keep a connection with organic living and dying. One of the things I'll be emphasising in the pastoral is the connection to the evocation of a creative, destructive universe, that both of those things are needed, that we need decay, we need to experience death in order to understand death, just as we need birth and vitality and fertility. So this is an eco-critical approach will not just idealise fertility and regeneration, it will recognise the role of dissolution, decay and death in that cycle, yeah? And look clear-eyed at both of those things and be able to balance both of those things. Very difficult, yeah, because our culture has so much idealised birth and so much made taboo in Western culture anyway of death, that finding that balance is very important. So to come back to the urban thing, degrees of alienation from nature and ways of overcoming that. There's a great use of national parks at the weekend in the UK at the moment. So urban people from Manchester and Sheffield both meet in the middle of the Pennines, coming from Manchester and Sheffield. They meet in the middle of the Pennines in the Peak District National Park at the weekend in order to regenerate, what John Muir called recreation, through going back in contact with wildness. Yeah?
Yes. If I may ask a question myself, I'm really interested in the intersection between science fiction and the current movies, science fiction films, and ecocriticism. And I lately came across a book by Philip Dick, Androids Dream of Sheep or something like this, and which was turned into a film, Blade Runner. And in this film, there is this kind of blurring boundaries between the robot and the human being and all of that. So how does ecocriticism intersect with latest inventions and this kind of postmodernist world that we're living in?
Yeah. From quite early on, there was a great interest in film studies and eco-criticism, because obviously the environment and environmental crisis, in fact, is a popular subject for films. And so green film has been the subject of a number of books. I mean, I think there are probably about half a dozen books now that are eco-critical approaches to film studies. One of them, an early one, is called Green Cinema, by my colleague in England. But the latest issue of Green Letters is going to be focusing on video games. So, you know, I did say digital studies at the end there is one aspect of eco-criticism. So representations of nature and the raising of questions about environment in film and in digital, the digital world are very much a growing area of study within eco-criticism at the moment. Okay?
Okay, I think we have to, because we're running out of time already, we have to end this wonderful discussion, but it's to be continued in the future. And I'm repeating our gratitude to Professor Terry Gifford for the wonderful lectures and information, and also for making us connected with the ISLE and with Glenn, did I?
Scott Slovak.
Scott Slovak, yes. And actually I'm going to, inshallah, write down, because we have all the emails of the people attending today.
Good.
So I'm just thinking aloud now that we could maybe have a brainstorming session and draft together the call for paper for the number of articles that are going to be represented in this important and prestigious journal. And we repeat the thank you for the connection and for the wonderful lecture. So please join me in thanking Professor Terry Gifford for this lecture. We're going to have a break of 10 minutes and then we can continue to the second lecture on for today, the pastoral poetry lecture.